There's a moment in every relationship, especially the ones marked by avoidance, where something powerful begins to shift. At first, it's almost invisible, a message sent at a time they normally withdraw, a question about your day that carries more weight than the words themselves, a softness in their tone that wasn't there before, and you feel it in your soul something is changing. The first sign an avoidant will eventually return is their emotional reconnection, that subtle but unmistakable movement toward you. It's not fireworks. It's not a grand declaration. It's a crack in the armor, a moment where their heart peeks through the walls they've spent a lifetime building. And listen, that movement isn't an accident. It's not luck. It's not random. It's a reflection of the energy, the growth, and the strength you've stepped into. When you rise, people feel it, even the ones who run. Avoidants don't come back because you chase them. They don't come back because you convince them. They come back because your energy becomes a safe place again, not because you shrink, but because you expand. You see, avoidance is born from fear of engulfment, fear of judgment, fear of losing identity. But when they see you grounded, certain, operating from a place of self-worth instead of desperation, something inside them shifts. They start to ask themselves questions they've avoided for years. Why did I run? What am I afraid of? What if this connection won't take from me but add to me? That emotional reconnection, however small, is the lighthouse beam cutting through their internal storm. But hear this truth, you are not waiting for them. You are becoming while they find their way back. Your power is not in trying harder. It's in being more aligned, more self-loving, more grounded in your purpose. When an avoidant senses that you've stopped needing them to fill a void, and instead you're inviting them into a life overflowing with purpose, they begin to reconnect not because they need saving, but because they see possibility. This is where relationships transform. This is where fear becomes trust. This is where distance becomes closeness. So if you're noticing those small shifts, the unexpected messages, the curiosity, the softness, don't cling, don't interpret, don't chase. Stand tall, stand rooted, stand in the truth of your worth. Because the greatest sign they'll return isn't just the change in them, it's the evolution in you. When you become a force of clarity, peace, and purpose, people who once ran begin to realize they are running from the very thing they've prayed for. And when that realization hits, they come back, not out of fear, not out of loneliness, but out of recognition. Recognition of your value, recognition of the connection, recognition of the truth they can no longer deny. So rise, grow, become, because the universe doesn't bring people back into your life by accident, only by alignment. Emotional reconnection is the most powerful and reliable indicator that an avoidant partner may eventually return, and it often begins long before they consciously realize it themselves. Avoidants typically withdraw, not because they don't care, but because caring feels overwhelming. They fear the loss of autonomy, the intensity of intimacy, and the vulnerability that connection demands. So when they begin to reconnect on an emotional level, no matter how subtle the behavior may seem, it signals a deep internal shift. Understanding this shift is essential, because emotional reconnection is rarely loud, bold, or dramatic. It is quiet, delicate, and often expressed in ways that contradict their usual patterns. One of the first signs of emotional reconnection is the avoidant showing up in small but unexpected ways. This could be as simple as a text that isn't logistical or obligatory but has emotional weight behind it. Maybe it's a message that checks on your well-being or references something meaningful you shared. Even a short, seemingly casual gesture can carry a powerful underlying truth. They are thinking about you and they feel safe enough in that moment to reach out. Avoidants do not reach out emotionally unless something inside them has softened. Another expression of emotional reconnection is when they begin to let their guard down, even slightly. Avoidants tend to keep their emotional world tightly controlled, carefully monitoring how much they reveal. But when they start reconnecting, they may share a bit more than usual, perhaps a frustration from their day, a fear, or a personal insight. These moments might be brief, but they are significant. Vulnerability for an avoidant is like stepping onto thin ice. They do it only when they believe the surface will hold. When they share these small truths with you, it's because, in that moment, you represent safety rather than pressure. Body language and tone are also part of emotional reconnection. You might notice that their voice softens during conversations, or the tension that used to surround your interactions begins to dissolve. They may maintain eye contact longer. They may linger in conversations rather than rushing to end them. These subtle changes are windows into their internal experience. Avoidants express comfort and emotional openness through the body before they articulate it with words. Consistency, even in small doses, plays a big role in emotional reconnection. Avoidants who are emotionally checked out tend to interact in sporadic, disconnected bursts, often focused on logistics or surface-level communication. But when an avoidant starts to reconnect, even their inconsistency becomes less inconsistent. Their check-ins may not be daily, but they become more intentional. There's a pattern, however slow or cautious, of showing up. They begin to reestablish a thread of connection, and it's because something in them feels compelled to maintain it. You might also notice curiosity emerging. This is a major emotional indicator because avoidants rarely inquire deeply into someone's life unless they feel emotionally safe. Curiosity looks like asking real questions about your day, your goals, your feelings, or your future. It may appear gentle, even subtle, but it carries deep significance. Curiosity is the doorway to intimacy. When an avoidant walks through that doorway, even tentatively, they are reconnecting emotionally. Perhaps the most telling aspect of emotional reconnection is the internal conflict you sense within them. Avoidants often wrestle with the desire to reconnect and the fear of losing themselves. When they reconnect emotionally, you may notice a push-pull dynamic, but it is gentler, less reactive. They retreat, but not as far. They return more quickly. The retreat itself becomes softer, less defensive, less final. This shows that their emotional bond with you still exists beneath the surface, quietly influencing their behavior. Emotional reconnection is not grand or explosive. It is gradual, understated, and full of nuance. But it is also undeniable. When an avoidant begins reconnecting emotionally, even if they don't say the words, their actions whisper the truth. They are opening the door again, even if only a crack at first. Consistent check-ins are one of the most meaningful signs that an avoidant partner may eventually return, because they represent a shift from emotional distancing to emotional tethering. Avoidants typically operate in a pattern of retreat, pulling away to regain a sense of safety, control, or independence. When they are overwhelmed, they disconnect. When they fear closeness, they go silent. So when they begin to show up in a consistent, even predictable rhythm, it signals that the internal threat they once felt around connection is decreasing. And that matters because avoidants do not pursue contact unless a deeper part of them feels drawn back toward the relationship. These check-ins might not look like a flood of heartfelt messages. In fact, they rarely do. Avoidants often communicate in small doses, but those doses are meaningful because they come from their emotional bandwidth, not just their habits. A message asking how you're doing, a text referencing something you mentioned last week, or even a simple good morning greeting. These are all signs that they're maintaining a thread of connection. It's not the content that matters most, it's the consistency. The rhythm itself is the message. When an avoidant is emotionally disconnected, their communication is often erratic. They may disappear for days or weeks without explanation. They communicate only when necessary or when it feels safe for them. Logistics, surface-level topics, or task-related messages are typical. But when an avoidant begins to check in consistently, the tone of communication shifts. It begins to feel less like obligation and more like intention. There is effort, however small. They are initiating, not just responding. They are reaching out in moments where silence once lived. These consistent check-ins also reveal something important about their emotional state. They are thinking of you when you're not around. Avoidants don't maintain communication because they feel pressured to. They do it because something inside them is stirring, the desire to maintain a connection that feels meaningful. Even when they're cautious, even when they're unsure of their readiness for deeper intimacy, that desire pulls them toward you again and again. Another meaningful aspect of consistent check-ins is the reduction of anxiety associated with closeness. Avoidants often fear that if they show interest too frequently, they will be perceived as giving up their autonomy or inviting expectations they're not ready to meet. So when they start reaching out consistently, it means they are no longer feeling suffocated by the connection. Their check-ins become a bridge, a way of staying connected without triggering their fear of emotional overwhelm. This balance is crucial. It helps them feel safe as they re-enter the emotional space they once backed away from. Consistency also creates familiarity, and familiarity is soothing to an avoidant nervous system. When they can engage on their terms without pressure, without intensity, they begin to rewire their internal associations with connection. What once felt dangerous now begins to feel grounding. Your presence becomes associated with emotional stability rather than emotional threat. And so they return again and again, creating a rhythm that starts to feel almost habitual, not an obligation, an anchor. Another important aspect is that consistent check-ins often come with subtle increases in emotional depth over time. At first, their messages might feel shallow or neutral, but as their comfort grows, so does their openness. A simple "how was your day?" evolves into curiosity about specific aspects of your life. A quick text becomes a short conversation. They begin to linger, even if just a little. This incremental expansion is the heart of avoidant re-engagement, not dramatic leaps, but steady steps. It's also common to notice that they check in during moments when they feel something emotionally, whether positive or vulnerable. They may reach out when they're stressed, when they achieve a small victory, or when something reminds them of you. These moments reveal that you hold emotional significance in their internal world. You are not just a person they once knew. You are someone they feel drawn to reconnect with, someone whose presence brings them a sense of grounding or comfort. Ultimately, consistent check-ins show that the avoidant is no longer running. They are pacing themselves toward connection. They are communicating in the only way they feel safe enough to at the moment. And while it might not look dramatic on the outside, inside, it represents a profound shift, a quiet but powerful return to emotional closeness. Vulnerability breakthroughs are one of the clearest and most profound indicators that an avoidant partner may eventually return, because vulnerability is the very thing avoidants fear most. People with avoidant tendencies typically protect themselves through emotional distance. They learned somewhere in their past, through experiences, relationships, or painful moments, that being vulnerable invites disappointment, judgment, or loss of control. So they build walls not out of malice, but out of survival. When those walls begin to crack, when even a small truth slips out that reveals something real inside them, it is not accidental. It is a powerful internal shift, a sign that they feel safe enough to let you see who they truly are. A vulnerability breakthrough often begins in subtle ways, through small disclosures that seem ordinary on the surface but carry emotional significance beneath. They might mention something that frustrates them, a fear they have, or a situation that made them feel unsure. These moments might appear brief because avoidants rarely dwell on emotional topics, but the fact that they shared it all is the breakthrough. For someone who typically hides their inner world, letting even a sliver of truth escape is a sign of trust forming again. You may also see this breakthrough in the way they respond to emotional conversations. Instead of shutting down, changing the subject, or withdrawing completely, they may stay present a little longer. They might not engage deeply yet, but they don't run. Their silence shifts from defensive to reflective. They pause, they consider. They sit with the moment rather than fleeing from it. This shift in engagement is profound because avoidants usually retreat the second they feel exposed. When they stay, even a moment longer, it means the perceived threat is decreasing. Another form of vulnerability breakthrough appears when they start acknowledging their own flaws or fears. Avoidants often carry an internal narrative that says, if I reveal my insecurities, I will lose love or respect. So when they say something like, I struggle with this, I didn't know how to handle that, or I was afraid, it means they are letting you into a part of themselves they rarely reveal. These admissions may be soft, understated, or wrapped in humor, but their meaning is unmistakable. They are trusting you with parts of themselves they normally protect. You may also notice breakthroughs in the way they reflect on the past or the relationship. Avoidants typically avoid reflection because it invites uncomfortable emotions. But when they begin to speak about what happened, what they felt, or what confused them, they're stepping into emotional territory they once refused to touch. They may not offer complete clarity, but even partial openness is evidence of an internal transformation. It shows they are not just suppressing their emotions, they are processing them. Vulnerability breakthroughs also happen when avoidants allow themselves to be comforted or supported. Accepting help, reassurance, or empathy can feel unbearably intimate to someone who fears reliance. So when they let you soothe them even briefly, it is a sign that their fear of dependence is loosening. They may brush it off afterward, but in the moment, they allowed connection to exist. That is the breakthrough. Another powerful sign is when they express concern about how their actions affected you. Avoidants are not typically expressive in this way because remorse requires emotional introspection and acknowledgement of closeness. But when they say something like, "I didn't want to hurt you," or "I know I disappeared," it means they are accessing compassion and accountability, two qualities they usually keep locked away. Even physical vulnerability can be a breakthrough. A lingering touch, a longer hug, or a moment of softness in their posture tells you that they feel safe. Avoidants regulate their emotions through physical distance. So when their body relaxes around you, it reflects emotional trust developing beneath the surface. All of these breakthroughs may appear small to someone who doesn't understand avoidant behavior, but to the avoidant, they are monumental. They are steps toward connection, steps toward intimacy, steps toward letting someone in again. And once vulnerability begins to surface, no matter how cautiously, it shows that the avoidant is not just thinking about returning emotionally, they are already in motion. Curiosity about you is one of the strongest and most revealing signs that an avoidant partner is beginning to re-engage emotionally and may eventually return. Avoidants rarely invest energy into exploring the inner world of someone they feel detached from. Their instinct is to pull away, to keep relationships surface level enough to stay safe. Curiosity, however, requires emotional presence. It requires attention, interest, and openness. So when an avoidant begins to ask questions, real questions, about your life, your feelings, or your experiences, it means something inside them has shifted. They are no longer trying to escape the connection, they're leaning toward it. This curiosity often begins quietly. They may ask how your day was, but with intention instead of politeness. They might circle back to something you mentioned earlier, showing they remembered. Avoidants are highly selective with their attention, so when they follow up, it is not casual, it is meaningful. Asking about a project, a dream you shared, or an experience you recently went through is their way of signaling that you remain important in their internal world. They are tracking you, noticing you, paying attention to you. That alone is powerful. Another form of curiosity appears when they begin to inquire about your emotional state. Avoidants typically avoid emotional conversations because emotions feel unpredictable and overwhelming to them. But when they ask things like, "How have you been feeling lately?" or "Are you doing okay?" it shows they are reconnecting with the emotional thread between you. They may still appear cautious or measured, but the very act of asking reveals a desire to understand your inner world. They would not venture into this territory unless the fear of closeness had begun to soften. Curiosity can also show up indirectly, in subtle actions rather than direct questions. They may watch your social media more frequently, respond to your stories or posts, or bring up something they noticed you shared. They may find reasons, small excuses, to check in, comment, or ask for details. Even if it seems casual, it's significant, because avoidants do not spend time observing the life of someone they feel indifferent toward. Their attention signals attachment resurfacing. You may notice curiosity emerging about your plans, your future, or the changes in your life since the separation or distance. They might ask what you've been working on, what's new, or what you're excited about. These questions are not just informational. They reveal concern, interest, and often a subtle fear of losing their place in your world. When an avoidant senses you are growing or moving forward, their curiosity becomes a bridge back to connection. It shows they still feel emotionally invested and subtly want to stay involved in your journey. Another powerful sign is when they become curious about their impact on you. Avoidants rarely open the door to reflective or relational conversations, especially ones that involve accountability or emotional honesty. But when they start asking how certain moments affected you, or how you interpreted something they did, it indicates emotional maturity developing beneath the surface. It means they are not just observing you, they are considering their role in your experience. This level of curiosity only arises when they value the connection enough to engage with uncomfortable truths. Curiosity also reveals itself in the way they listen. When an avoidant is disconnected, their listening is often minimal, distracted, or distant. But when they start paying full attention, when they ask deeper questions, follow the thread of the story, or respond thoughtfully, they are signaling emotional engagement. Their presence becomes fuller, more attentive, more intentional. They are not just hearing you, they are absorbing you. You may even notice curiosity about who you are becoming. Avoidants are deeply sensitive, even if they don't show it, and they often fear losing people who matter. So when they sense growth in you, they naturally want to understand it. They may ask about new habits, new perspectives, or new environments in your life. This is their way of staying connected to your evolution rather than drifting further into distance. Curiosity is connection seeking. It is the soul leaning forward. When an avoidant becomes curious again, when they start wanting to understand you, hear you, know you, they have already crossed the first internal threshold back toward emotional closeness. It shows that the part of them that once ran now longs for the connection they tried to avoid. Reduced defensiveness is one of the most telling indicators that an avoidant partner may eventually return because it signals a deep inner shift from protection to openness. Avoidants typically rely on defensiveness as their first line of emotional armor. It is their shield against vulnerability, intimacy, and the perceived risks of connection. When they feel emotionally threatened, pressured, or overwhelmed, defensiveness becomes their default response, shutting down, withdrawing, dismissing, or minimizing. So when those defenses begin to soften, even subtly, it means something significant is happening beneath the surface. They are no longer trying to guard themselves from you. They are slowly learning to be with you again. This softening can appear in many small, often overlooked ways. One of the earliest signs is a change in how they respond to emotional conversations. Where they might have previously shut down, become irritated, or made excuses to escape, you may notice them staying present just a little longer. They might listen with fewer interruptions or show less visible discomfort. Even a simple, calm response in a moment that once would have triggered withdrawal is meaningful. For avoidance, presence itself is vulnerability. When they choose to remain, they're choosing connection over protection. Reduced defensiveness can also show up in their tone. Avoidants under stress often speak sharply, briefly, or with emotional distance. As their defenses lower, their tone becomes gentler, more grounded, more receptive. A softening, not just in their words, but in their energy, signals that they are no longer operating from fear. They feel safer. They feel less threatened. And feeling safe is essential for an avoidant to return emotionally. Another key aspect is their willingness to take responsibility. Avoidants commonly struggle with accountability because acknowledging harm or mistakes feels emotionally risky. It threatens the image of self-sufficiency they rely on to feel secure. So when they begin to accept responsibility, even in small ways, I know I pulled away, I understand that hurt you, I didn't handle that well, it shows tremendous internal growth. They are letting go of the defensive need to protect their ego and instead prioritizing truth, connection, and understanding. You may also see reduced defensiveness in how they react to your emotions. Avoidants often minimize or dismiss emotions because emotional intensity triggers their fear of losing control. But when they start validating your feelings or at least sitting with them without shutting down, it means they're no longer overwhelmed by the idea of emotional closeness. They might say things like, "I hear you, that makes sense," or "I didn't realize that." These responses might seem simple, but for an avoidant, they represent a major reduction in defensive barriers. Reduced defensiveness also appears in the way they manage conflict. Previously, conflict may have led them to withdraw, become cold, or shut down entirely. But now they might stay engaged, ask questions, or express a desire to understand rather than escape. They may no longer interpret conflict as a threat to their freedom or identity. Instead, they begin to see it as a pathway to clarity, connection, or even healing. This shift is monumental because avoidants generally view conflict as a danger signal. When they see it as something survivable or even productive, it means they're emotionally reconnecting. Another area where you'll notice reduced defensiveness is in their openness to feedback. Avoidants often perceive feedback as criticism, which triggers immediate withdrawal or counter-defense. But when an avoidant begins to listen without reacting, to consider your perspective instead of shutting down, they are showing that they trust you enough to let their guard down. They're not preparing for attack. They're preparing for understanding. Even their body language reflects this shift. They might face you more directly, maintain eye contact, or adopt relaxed postures instead of closed, guarded ones. Physical openness mirrors emotional openness. When their body softens, their heart is softening too. Finally, reduced defensiveness reveals that the avoidant is beginning to feel safe in the connection, safe enough to risk closeness, communication, and vulnerability. Their nervous system is no longer in self-protection mode. They are beginning to lean in rather than pull away. This softening of defenses is not a small shift. It is a profound one. It signals that deep within, The avoidant is no longer running from the relationship. They are quietly, cautiously, but unmistakably finding their way back to it. An internal shift within an avoidant partner is the deepest and most transformative sign that they may eventually return, because it reflects a change not just in their behavior, but in their core emotional landscape. Avoidants do not reconnect externally until something significant evolves internally. Their patterns are rooted in survival strategies developed long before the relationship, strategies built on self-protection, autonomy, and emotional distance. So when their internal world begins to shift, even quietly, it means the foundational beliefs that once kept them away are starting to soften. This is the kind of shift that isn't always visible at first, but it is powerful, lasting, and undeniable once it begins to surface. This internal shift often starts with awareness. For avoidants, awareness is a major step because their coping mechanisms rely on detaching from uncomfortable emotions rather than confronting them. When they begin to notice what they feel, whether it's missing you, remembering moments with you, or reflecting on their own patterns, they're stepping into emotional territory they once avoided. They may not express this awareness yet, but it shows up in subtle changes, longer pauses, deeper thoughtfulness, or moments where they seem lost in reflection. This is the beginning of emotional awakening. Part of this shift involves the recognition that connection does not threaten their independence. Avoidants often believe that intimacy means losing themselves, being controlled, or being trapped. But as they grow, through time, experience, or the emotional impact of distance, they start to realize that closeness does not erase their autonomy. They begin to understand that healthy connection actually supports their individual strength rather than undermines it. This realization is monumental. It changes how they relate to themselves and others. It opens the door to approaching relationship from empowerment instead of fear. Another aspect of the internal shift is the awakening of longing, the quiet but persistent awareness that they miss the connection. Avoidants suppress longing because it makes them feel vulnerable, but suppressing does not mean it disappears. When that longing becomes too strong to ignore, they begin to question their old patterns. They may not verbalize it, but internally, they start thinking about the times you supported them, understood, or made them feel connected without pressure. They remember the warmth, the comfort, the sense of home that existed beneath their fears. Longing softens their defenses from the inside out. This shift also involves a confrontation with their own avoidance. Avoidants often run on autopilot, reacting from fear-based instincts. But when they begin to examine themselves, when they ask why they push people away, why they shut down, why they fear closeness, they are moving into self-awareness, something they may have avoided for years. This internal confrontation is a turning point because it makes their patterns conscious. And once patterns become conscious, they begin to lose their power. Growth plays a huge role in this internal shift, whether through personal reflection, life experiences, emotional discomfort, or simply the passage of time. Avoidants eventually reach moments where they outgrow their old ways of protecting themselves. What once kept them safe begins to limit them. What once helped them survive begins to keep them lonely. And in that realization, they begin to desire a new way of relating, one that includes vulnerability, closeness, and emotional expression. Another part of the shift is emotional regulation. As avoidants mature internally, they become better at managing their fears rather than being controlled by them. Instead of shutting down instantly, they take a moment to breathe, to reflect, to steady themselves. This capacity for emotional regulation is crucial because it allows them to stay present through discomfort instead of running from it. It's a sign that the emotional muscles they once lacked are beginning to develop. Finally, the internal shift reveals itself through a change in their internal dialogue. Instead of telling themselves, I can't handle closeness, they begin to think, maybe I can try. Instead of believing, I need distance to be safe, they begin to feel connection doesn't take my freedom, it enriches it. This new internal narrative lays the foundation for all outer behaviors that follow. When an avoidant experiences an internal shift, they are not just reconsidering the relationship, they are evolving as a person. And once that inner evolution begins, returning becomes not a question of if, but when, because they are no longer motivated by fear, but by a desire for genuine, grounded, meaningful connection. And as we bring this message to a close, remember this. The power was never in whether the avoidant returns. It was in who you became on the journey. When you rise in self-respect, emotional clarity, and inner strength, you create a space where authentic connection can flourish, whether with them or with someone aligned with your soul's growth. Trust the timing, trust the lessons, and trust the unfolding of your own becoming. You are not defined by who leaves or who returns. You are defined by the unwavering light within you that no distance can dim. Thank you for allowing me to walk with you through these insights. And may you continue forward with courage, grace, and an unshakable belief in your worth.